Dennis Bergkamp, one of Arsenal and the Premier League's finest ever imports, a master of his art. With the help of some Gunners fans and a couple of his former teammates, we look back on the career of a man whose unrivaled technique, class and aura won him a place in the hearts of the Arsenal faithful forever.
Het balbezit voor Frank de Boer. Frank de Boer speelt de bal heel goed naar Dennis Bergkamp. Dennis Bergkamp neemt de bal aan. Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp! Oh! Frank de Boer speelt de bal naar Dennis Bergkamp. Die neemt de bal feilloos aan. En hij schiet de bal erin. We spelen nog officieel 20 seconden. Dennis Bergkamp 2-1.
There's Perez picking out Bergkamp, and Bergkamp with a chance, and he's taken it! Brilliant goal!
That means a few notes now. Well, he has done, and he's crossed for Bergkamp. Brilliant play from the Dutchman. Wonderful goal! It's Arsenal's day now!
Born in Amsterdam, Dennis was one of 4 children. His father Wim was an electrician and an amateur footballer playing in the lower leagues of Holland. A product of the famous Ajax youth system, Dennis was handed his professional debut by one of his childhood heroes, Johan Cruyff, on the 14th of December 1986 against Roda JC. Bergkamp was to score his first Ajax goal in February of 1987 during their emphatic 6-0 victory over HFC Haarlem. Dennis went on to make 23 appearances in the 86-87 season. He also made his European debut in the Cup Winners' Cup versus Malmo, a competition Ajax went on to win. The Dutchman went on to establish himself as a regular for the Netherlands' most famous club and played a huge part in their march to the Eredivisie title of the 1989-1990 season. That was Ajax's first league title in 5 years, and Bergkamp scored 29 goals in 36 games that season, sharing the Golden Boot award with Romario. Remember him? With Bergkamp's influence growing, Ajax went on to lift the 1992 UEFA Cup and the 1993 Dutch Cup, but there were to be personal accolades coming his way too, as he was named Dutch Footballer of the Year in 1992 and 1993. By the time Dennis left Ajax, he had scored 122 goals in 239 matches for his hometown club. Bergkamp's reputation was growing, and some of Europe's top clubs began showing a real interest in his services. A whole host of the continent's biggest clubs were rumoured to be keen on the Dutchman, and in 1993 he transferred to Inter for a fee of £7.1 million. That might not seem like a lot nowadays, but back then that was quite a hefty sum of money. It's said that Real Madrid were amongst the clubs interested in Dennis, but Johan Cruyff advised him against that particular move. But despite the Spanish club's strong interest, Bergkamp already had his heart set on a move to Serie A. During that period, there was no question Serie A was at the peak of its powers. Widely regarded as football's premier competition, you could understand why Dennis was so keen to move there. Shortly after the transfer was announced, Dennis told the press, "Inter met all my demands. The most important thing for me was the stadium, the people at the club, and their style of play." Bergkamp made his debut against Reggiana on the 29th of August 1993 at the San Siro in a 2-1 victory. The Dutchman scored his first goal for the Nerazzurri against Cremonese that September, but had a difficult time against the organised and stubborn defences the Italian sides pride themselves on. Dennis only managed 7 goals in his first season, but that was partly down to the manager Osvaldo Bagnoli's inability to find a stable partnership. Inter finished 13th that year and just a point clear of relegation, but they were successful in the UEFA Cup where they beat Austria Salzburg in the final. Dennis was the competition's joint top goalscorer with 8 goals. Another season at Inter meant another manager. This time Ottavio Bianchi was tasked with stabilising the club. Bergkamp struggled with stress injuries and fatigue that season following on from the 94 World Cup and scored just 5 goals in 26 appearances. Bergkamp's poor performances and shy character didn't sit well with the Italian media, and the relationship between them and Dennis became very uncomfortable. It's safe to say it never really worked out for Dennis Bergkamp in Milan, and I wanted to find out a little bit more about why, so I caught up with Italian journalist Vittorio Campanile.
It's the context that is really important, because at that time Milan was dominating in Serie A and in Europe. They had Gullit, Van Basten, and Inter obviously was feeling the pressure, and they hope signing Bergkamp, that was considered one of the rising star of that period, they could finally close the gap with the AC Milan had Arrigo Sacchi at that time. They were playing amazing football, very offensive mind football, while Inter was a team that was still playing Italian style of football, very defensive, counter-attack. And so they was trying to even change that mindset, playing more offensive football. They failed with Arrigo the year before, and so they went with Bagnoli, hoping that with Bergkamp, Inter would finally play good football. But the problem was that Bagnoli was a very, very defensive mind manager, and so Bergkamp struggled because he was used to a very offensive football, and with Inter he was pretty much left alone to try invent and play alone and invent something with 9 players only thinking about defending. So one of the reasons why Bergkamp failed at Inter was he was coming from Ajax, a very offensive mind football, and Inter instead was a completely defensive mind team, and so that's why it didn't work. Well, another thing really important is when you play for a Milan team, you know that the pressure is really, really high on you. It's not only the fans that are waiting for you to shine and perform highly, but even the press. Every week there was question marks because obviously Bergkamp wasn't performing as expected. He came like, the new big star, and so everybody was expecting him to prove, and he didn't. So the relationship with the press wasn't great because he didn't speak a lot. He was quite shy, so he didn't want to talk. On the other side, a lot of press was demanding to talk to him, understand why he wasn't playing that well. So yeah, he struggled on that side. And when he left Inter after a couple of years, nobody believed he could play better at Arsenal, for example. Well, he said that when he came to Inter, they promised him that he would play a very offensive mind football. He was Barcelona, Juventus were bidding for him when he was at Ajax, and he said, no, I want to go to Inter because I feel Inter is the right team for me. And they promised him to play a very offensive football. Instead, he arrived and he said after the first month when we tested very offensive mind football, things didn't go well, and immediately Bagnoli came back and played a very defensive football, and that's why he didn't work out. And he said, I was playing, and every time I was alone with one striker in front of me, when I was used to play with at least other 4 players attacking with me, and that was shocking for me, and I think that's the reason why it didn't work out. Massimo Moratti, that at that time was the CEO of Inter, the owner of Inter, said to Bruce Roche, the manager of Arsenal at that time, you're lucky if he scored more than 10 goals. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember Bergkamp playing with Inter. He was a disaster. You can feel that he was really shy. He hardly played. The fact is, he played well in Europe and bad in Serie A because he struggled with Italian defense. So nobody could imagine that he could play. It's like Thierry Henry with Juventus, He was playing rubbish with Juventus, and then you remember what happened, So.
My thanks to Vittorio Campanile for his contribution. Bergkamp's dream move to Italy didn't quite work out, but his misfortune in Milan was to benefit Arsenal greatly. On the 20th of June 1995, Dennis Bergkamp signed for Arsenal for a fee of approximately £7.5 million, breaking the club's record transfer fee that was previously set at £2.5 million. Initially, Bergkamp struggled to make an impact, and he failed to score in his first 6 league games, prompting ridicule from some sections of the press. On September the 23rd, 1995, Dennis opened his account with 2 goals versus Southampton at Highbury. The Dutchman went on to score 11 goals in his first season, including a last-minute winner versus Bolton on the final day of the campaign, a winner that earned the club a UEFA Cup spot for the following year. Arsenal had been in decline prior to Bergkamp's arrival, and he's been described by many as the catalyst for the change in Arsenal's style. With Bergkamp in the side and Arsene Wenger taking the reins just over a year later, the Gunners' identity had shifted from a workmanlike, regimented and well-organised side to the perfect blend of flair and power. Back in 2013, Dennis Bergkamp sat down with former teammate Martin Keown and spoke about why he decided to join the Arsenal.
Dennis, I wanted to ask you, you've been at Inter Milan, why did you come to Arsenal?
Well, first of all, it was a quick decision because I didn't have a good time towards my second season or the end of my second season there. But the president, Moratti, he said, no, we're going to stick to the same people next season. So I said, okay, then I have to move on. I wanted to come to England, definitely. And Arsenal was so more or less the first ones who showed interest and really wanted me to come there. First of all, I didn't know about the boring Arsenal. I only realized that once I was playing there. It was totally different from the professional Italian culture. It was like a free style, you know, like it wasn't that professional. We had every time we went to the hotel, the minibar was full with everything, with all sorts of drinks, and the pre-match meal was, in my opinion, not professional enough. The training sessions weren't hard and long enough. So I was a little bit surprised, but funny enough, it is what I needed at that time. It was to get rid of that Italian culture, like where football is more like a profession than a hobby. And soon in England, I realized, okay, this is much better. This is where I feel free. This is where I can develop again. Soon enough after, we realized that there was a plan at Arsenal. Arsene Wenger got involved. Then I realized what was happening.
You mentioned Wenger. Was it the perfect marriage, player and manager?
Yeah, I think we had the same, and we still have the same philosophy about football. I think the relationship was good. It wasn't like very close, but it was good enough. We had our arguments as well, which were silly arguments, because it was about me playing or not playing, which is no problem because there was so much respect for each other. It's fantastic if you're on the same level of thinking about football, and as you know, he's very relaxed, very calm, and that suited me as well.
In the 1997-1998 campaign, Wenger's first full season in charge, Bergkamp had what many regard as his greatest season in an Arsenal shirt. The club went on to win the league and FA Cup double, with Dennis scoring 22 goals. This was the year Bergkamp scored that incredible hat-trick up at Filbert Street versus Leicester, one thing that will live long in the memory of anybody old enough to remember. After being sent off in an FA Cup quarter-final that year for elbowing Steve Lomas, the Dutchman picked up an unfortunate injury which ruled him out of the remainder of Arsenal's games. Bergkamp would miss his first FA Cup final, but regardless, he was awarded the PFA Player of the Year award, becoming only the third non-British player to receive the accolade. The following season, the Gunners were unable to retain their Premier League crown. Dennis, though, was just as magnificent, but sadly his season will always be remembered for that penalty miss against Manchester United in the FA Cup semi-final. Peter Schmeichel denied the Dutchman, and if I'm not mistaken, Bergkamp never took another penalty for the remainder of his career. Dennis's influence during the club's most successful period was clear for all to see. His touch, vision, technique and ability was as good as anything the Premier League had ever seen. He built fantastic partnerships with the likes of Thierry Henry and Ian Wright, who both say he's the best they've ever played with. And when you look back at some of his goals, passes and moments of genius, it's almost impossible to argue. It's common knowledge that Dennis had a real fear of flying, despite the reports which suggested that this fear came from an incident whilst with the Netherlands national team at the 1994 World Cup. Dennis, in his 2013 autobiography, stated that his phobia was in fact caused by his time at Inter, in which they regularly travelled to away games in small aeroplanes. Dennis had this to say: "I've got this problem and I have to live with it. I can't do anything about it. It's a psychological thing and I can't explain it. I have not flown on a plane for 2 years. The Dutch FA has been sympathetic. So have Arsenal so far. I am considering psychiatric help. I can't fly. I just freeze. I get panicky. It starts the day before when I can't sleep." Now, that condition severely limited Dennis's ability to play in away matches in European competitions and, of course, to travel with the national team. In some cases, he would travel overland by car or by train, but the logistics of some matches were so difficult that he just wouldn't travel at all. Bergkamp's final competitive goal for the Arsenal was to come in the 89th minute of a game versus West Bromwich Albion, and that will forever be known as Bergkamp Day. The fans were given orange shirts with his name and number printed on the back to celebrate the great man's fantastic Arsenal career. His testimonial versus Ajax was the first game at the new Emirates Stadium in July of 2006. What better way to open the new state-of-the-art stadium? The first half was played by the two current squads, but the second half featured the likes of Marco van Basten, the De Boer brothers, and Johan Cruyff. Bergkamp played 423 times for the Arsenal, scoring 120 goals. He was by no means an out-and-out goalscorer, but a genius nonetheless. One of world football's finest talents, a genius, an innovator, and a master of his art. Exclusively for this project, I caught up with two of Dennis's former teammates, firstly Nigel Winterburn and then Jeremie Aliadiere. I wanted to know what the name Dennis Bergkamp means to them.
Quality, legend, ice cool, I used to call him the Iceman, just a real gentleman, but ruthless. How many more words would you like me to use? I mean, just absolutely an incredible player and a privilege to really play with.
For me, it just means legend. You know, I just as a kid, before joining Arsenal, for me, Dennis Bergkamp was the best. You know, he was like one of the best. Obviously, I was attracted by Arsenal because of the French connection and Arsene Wenger, but purely player was obviously Dennis Bergkamp. Then be able to play with him and learning from him was just extraordinary. It was incredible.
What would you say you learnt from someone like Dennis Bergkamp in particular?
You know what I've learned? People might think, oh, that's a bit weird, but I didn't learn much footballistic, like just purely technique or stuff like that. It's more how calm and how cool he was, how professional, how driven he was. Like I've never seen him gain, losing his calm and losing his cool in training. And I always thought that was such a quality because I've always thought he knows, he knows even if he gets angry inside him, he knows how far he can go. And I've never seen him, always quiet and never seen him lose his head, and just completely like scream, shout and. So I just thought, God, that's an example for me because I think if you can stay focused on your game like he was, then you can't really make any mistake. You just always focus on what you've got to do. And I just thought that was awesome from him. Yeah.
What best memory of Dennis Bergkamp?
Well, when I'm doing some of the tours of Arsenal and I speak to some of the younger members who obviously know Dennis Bergkamp, I'm talking about children sort of 10, 11, 12, probably through their parents really than anything else. I always tell them to go onto YouTube or any internet site and just put Dennis Bergkamp hat-trick away, Leicester City. I think that tells you everything that you need to know about him. Different types of goals, but just real quality in most of his performances for Arsenal.
What was sort of everybody's initial thoughts on Bergkamp when he first arrived? Because obviously he came from abroad. Was everybody shocked by the way he was?
I don't think so. I think really for me it was like a significant signing when he first arrived. Obviously under Bruce Rioch as well, which a lot of people forget, coming along with David Platt, similar sort of time. But I think once Dennis settled in, you could see within training and then those performances started to come, in the games, his touch, his awareness of players around him, the precision of his passing, the chances that he set up for his teammates, and then adding to that the wonderful goals that he scored. I think it became apparent quite quickly that, once you it's hard to describe it. Once you train with somebody over a short period of time, you get a feeling of what they're like, as long as they can transfer that form through onto a match day. But there was no doubt that Bergkamp did all that. His training attributes went onto the pitch and beyond that, really.
As a player or as a human being? Because as a player, I think that goal at Newcastle I was on the bench that day, and I just could not believe. From the bench, I actually didn't even understand what he's done. I was just like, what just happened? What has he done? Did he mean to do that? Because obviously you're on the bench, you're far away, and then it's after. When I saw the replay, I just thought, Dennis, what have you just done, mate? How did you think about doing this? Even in training, nobody can think about doing that control and that twist, So, for me, as a pure on the football pitch, that was his best goal, I think, and one of my favourite memory.
What was he like as a person, like as in his character, personality?
Well, he was, he was a joker and he was a funny guy when you knew him. But when I first joined the first team dressing room, he would not talk to me because obviously I was a kid coming through. I had to prove him that I was good enough to be in that dressing room with him and with the other boys. And I can remember he talked quite a while, man. He really talked like a few months until that day when I ended up in the medical room and he was there having a massage and we were having a chat with the physio and the fitness coach. And then we used to play them quiz where there's 5 Italians that won the FA Cup and the Premier League, what's their name? And then we were all thinking, and I think the physio, one of the physio came up with Juninho. And Dennis looked at me like, what did he just say? And I looked at him and we started cracking up, like, because Juninho is Brazilian, who has never been Italian. Do you know what I mean? So we started having a proper laugh. And from that day, him and I were just like laughing every single day, calling each other Juninho. And he was just like, and that's when we started really having a bit of a bond. And even in training, we talk. And then he was giving me advice and all sorts of things. But before that, I've never really spoke to him. I was just like saying morning and that's it. That's about it. So, it's funny how just one joke just kind of got us to talk and got us closer, yeah.
In terms of the Premier League greats, how highly would you rank Dennis Bergkamp?
Wow, for me, right up there with the best. I think in terms of obviously goals, assists, but influence as well on the Premier League and on a team like Arsenal and what he's done for the club and achieve. I think, he's right up there with the best. With the lack of Thierry Henry, Eric Cantona, all them guys. I think he's right up there, man. I think he's. Technically what he could do and his vision, he could see things that nobody else saw. It's just like in training, he used to do stuff and see passes and just think, oh my God, how did he manage to see? It's like the guy's made a run beyond his vision. Do you know what I mean? And he still saw it. So it was, he always felt that he was one time advance of everybody. He knew before the ball came to him what he was going to do and obviously that's just only great players that can do.
Wow, I mean, we'd have to sort of list a lot of players and go back, and it depends how far you're going back. But he's going to be very, very high on that list. I mean, I think I'd almost like to put the question of Arsenal greats, and I think he would be near the very, very top without a doubt in my time. I mean, I always say when we talk about legends of your club, I only really talk about in the period that I was at the club, in the modern period, because some of the players of the past that I haven't seen much of at Arsenal, and people talk very, very fondly about, but Bergkamp would from my point of view would be right up there. I'd put him down as one of my all-time greats at Arsenal, alongside Thierry Henry for sure. That's how highly I rate him.
Great. And just finally, Nigel, last question. What was Dennis Bergkamp like on a personal level? Because obviously you knew him and you worked with him day in, day out. What can you tell us about his personality and his character?
Quite quiet, not at all big-headed, but I think in complete control in terms of he knew his ability and delivered it on a big scale in many games. And also very ruthless in a sly way when it needed to be. I think that's the best way I could describe it. But he was such an amazing player to play with.
What was his relationship like with Arsene Wenger?
Very close, very close. He was one of the boys that used to be with Arsene all the time, talking and exchanging with tactics, whatever. He used to always give his opinion, and to be honest, everybody kind of respected Dennis, so he knew he had that power inside the dressing room to say what he wanted to say and to give his opinion on whatever tactic, set pieces, whatever it was that we were discussing. Everybody listened.
I also caught up with my colleague over at the same old Arsenal, Lee Judges.
Dennis Bergkamp for me is obviously the best player, in my opinion, that's ever played for Arsenal. Absolutely, he just had everything. He could score goals, his passing range, everything about him. He had that little nasty streak in him as well that I quite like in a player as well. So, but just all round, and I think, if I'll be honest, he took Arsenal. He made Arsenal, put them onto a different level, if you know what I mean. Like, they was always a good side, good club, Arsenal, but he took us to somewhere where I never thought we'd go, and changed us from a workman-like side, very, very regimental, to a free-flowing, a wonderful footballing side. And I think that has to be down to his way of playing and everything like that. And I think that's why, to me, he just beats Thierry Henry to the best player to play for Arsenal.
What about your favourite Bergkamp memory?
Do you know what? I was thinking about this today. Funny enough, one of my favourite Bergkamp memories actually isn't when he played for Arsenal. It was when he played for Holland. In that game against Argentina in the World Cup, when he scored that goal. When I thought it was probably one of the best World Cup goals I've ever seen. And if you remember, England had been knocked out by Argentina in the round before, so we was feeling a little bit bitter. And he come and done that, which was absolutely fantastic. And that is probably that. I have to say the goal against Newcastle. Watching that, I was absolutely dumbstruck by that goal. Absolute genius. But my other two favourite things I was thinking about today, and I don't know if you remember the pass that he gave for Patrick Vieira against Chelsea when we was really up against. I think if you remember, Patrick gave away the ball in the first minute in that game against Chelsea, and the unbeaten run was could have been lost that day. And an absolute wonder of a pass from him, which put Patrick in, which we equalised, and then Edu went and got the winner. And my other moment for him is I think it's in the 2002 season. We was playing Bolton, which they were a nemesis to us at the time, always taking points off us. We found it very, very difficult against them. And we went up there on a midweek game. I think it was a Monday night, and he put in one of the best passes, ever needle passes I've ever seen. I don't know if you remember, Harry, and Freddie Lundberg scored the goal, and we won. I think we won up there 2-0, and it pushed us towards the title. And just those little bits of magic that he could do, and obviously his first goals for Arsenal against Southampton live in the memory as well. But just his all-round play. People go on about the game when he scored those goals. And I always feel a little bit funny about that because we'd never actually won the game, But they would be my prominent. I'd say the best goal that, come to think of it now, has just come to my head. Probably his best goal was the one against Spurs when he cut back inside, pouring rain that day, and he cut inside and with a superb first touch, and smashed it in goal. So they're my long-lasting memories of Dennis Bergkamp.
I also caught up with the godfather of the Arsenal podcasting world, Andrew from Arseblog.
I associate the name Dennis Bergkamp with a kind of class that I find sort of aspirational for Arsenal, in that he seemed to me to be the perfect player for the ideal model of what we all want Arsenal to be, if that makes sense. I mean, there have been great Arsenal characters down the years and really strong leaders and personalities, who've come to embody the club. But when it comes to just professionalism, technical brilliance, character, attitude, and just something that exists a little bit above the mortal plane, that's what I think of when I think of Dennis Bergkamp. He had a profound effect on the club. And in some ways, I think he's become the benchmark for the standards that we all expect now, because he was just so good and had such a wonderful time at this football club, and we all enjoyed watching him so much. I think that he's now become the benchmark for what we expect from an Arsenal player, unfair or otherwise. I think that's what it is. My favourite Dennis Bergkamp moment. It's hard to narrow them down. I guess you think about goals, don't you? You think about the amazing goals that he scored, and everybody will talk to you, I'm sure, during this little feature about the Newcastle goal and what an amazing goal it was. For me, the best goal was the Sunderland goal. The one that he scored at Roker Park, and they all did the celebration with their hands over their mouth. He had this sort of double drag back, and then he curled the ball into the top corner. From a goal scoring point of view, that's definitely my favourite Bergkamp moment. I think as well, some of the passes and the weight of the passes that he would make and the assists that he would provide were just as good. And I think about the one, is it against Bayer Leverkusen or was it Juventus? It could have been Juventus in the Champions League, where he just held onto the ball and held onto it and held onto it. And then he just kind of scooped it up with his foot over the defence. Freddie Ljungberg was there to score a goal. And it was just the ability to maintain possession and wait for a teammate that he knew was going to do something. And not only did he do all that, when the moment came, he was able to execute a piece of just inch perfect brilliance to make sure that Freddie could score the goal. So I think those two things are really stand out for me in a category in which we could sit here and talk all day.
How do you rank Dennis Bergkamp in terms of the Premier League greats?
I think he has to be up there with the very best of them. There's a weird thing, I kind of feel like Dennis almost underachieved, given his talent and given the brilliance that he possessed as a footballer and his determination to succeed. I feel there was a period where, after that penalty miss in the game against Manchester United, the FA Cup semi-final at Villa Park, I don't know whether that had a really bad effect on him. I know he did suffer from some injuries around that time. He had some Achilles problems, but I do feel like for a player of his brilliance, he kind of underachieved. But even with that, I think you have to look at what he did for Arsenal and what he meant to Arsenal. Think about what our top signing was before he arrived. Was it Ian Wright, or was it Chris Kiwamia or John Hartson, in around the £2.5 million mark, and he arrives in the summer of 95, was 95, wasn't it? It was 95. I absolutely know it was 95 because I know where I was when I heard about the news. I was working in a radio station in Tipperary in Ireland, which was, one of my least favourite jobs ever. But I remember Arsenal, the sports girl, the girl who was doing the sports news says, Arsenal are signing Dennis Bergkamp. And I was like, come on. What are you talking about? This is ridiculous. But Arsenal signed Dennis Bergkamp, and he had this effect on a club which had been sort of stuck, and it was at the end of the George Graham era, which was very successful, and Bruce Rioch could come in, and you could see that in signing Dennis Bergkamp, there was a seriousness to the ambition of the people who are running the football club. They wanted to make Arsenal into something different, and to take advantage of this Premier League money and this new Premier League landscape. So for me, I think he marks a change in what Arsenal were. And he brought people with him. People were more prepared to come to Arsenal. Arsenal became a much more attractive destination because we had Dennis Bergkamp. And I think the length of time that he played for the club, the fact that he would get one more year and he was still able to contribute, I think he's right up there with the very best of them. He might not be the greatest goal scorer. He might not, have won as much as some of the other players. But I think in terms of the effect that he had, not just on Arsenal, but also the Premier League, I think a lot of players who came to the Premier League looked and saw Dennis Bergkamp and said, well, if Bergkamp is there, that's a place I want to be. So I think he had a really profound effect on Arsenal and English football.
He had an exceptional technical quality, great vision, and great skill, very skillful to finish. But as well, he added something to his game that was elegance, class, and he struck you when you saw him play straight away. There's something special with this guy, and even today, all the former players who played with him said he is the player, the player that remains in your brain, that the player remains in your head because he had something special.
Dennis finished his career having made 552 professional appearances, scoring 201 goals. He also managed 79 caps for his country, scoring 37 goals in the famous orange shirt. Bergkamp also won 3 Premier League titles, 4 FA Cups, 3 Community Shields, 2 UEFA Cups, a European Cup Winners' Cup, 2 Dutch Cups, and of course the Eredivisie title. Dennis was also presented with a whole host of individual awards, a list which is far too long for me to run through now because, to be quite honest, I don't have a spare half an hour. So do look it up if you're one of those that's a little bit too young to remember Dennis Bergkamp, because I can tell you Dennis was one of the greatest footballers the Premier League has ever seen, and in my opinion, the biggest talent Arsenal have ever had. A huge thanks to all our contributors: Jeremie, Aliadiere, Nigel, Winterburn, Vittorio, Campanile, Andrew from Arseblog, Lee Judges from the Same Old Arsenal podcast. Without those guys, we wouldn't have been able to put this show together. So a huge thank you to them and to you, the listeners, for tuning in as you do every week. We really, really appreciate it. And we'll be back very, very soon with another episode looking back at the career of another Arsenal legend. Until then, take care.